So this is a quick presentation to highlight the expectation of lesson planning in the teacher planners and how to use the learning cycle effectively. So the little video is going to go through a quick description of the learning cycle, look at the differentiation and assessment for learning keys, and give some examples of how to construct the lesson planning lozenge in line with expectations in teacher planners. So a quick overview of the learning cycle, starting with connecting the learning, going through input, activity, demonstrate learning, and a plenary to finish off an hour's session. This forms into an extremely memorable mnemonic, SIADP. So if in doubt, if you just memorize that, that'll help you to remember what the learning cycle is. In terms of an overview of what it looks like, this is an example of what would fit into one of the small sections of the teacher planner. So the connect, or just a C, I, A, D and P there, overview of what those different stages are. Use of the differentiation key to highlight the planned differentiation, and reference to assessment for learning planned in the teacher planner as well. We'll look at these in individual stages and then come back to this example towards the end of the video. If at any point you want to just pause the video and have a read of the information on this presentation, feel free to do so. But the presentation will be saved on Moodle as well, so you can have a look at that there. One of the kind of fundamental themes this year is going to be every second counts. So thinking of a lesson, thinking of that hour or hour and a half, that every second in that lesson counts. If we lose a couple of minutes from the start of a lesson and a couple of minutes from the end of a lesson, just say that adds up to 5 minutes. So over the course of a week, there's 20 minutes. And if we assume that the term length's about 32 weeks, so 20 minutes a week for 32 weeks, that adds up to 640 minutes. Divide that by 60-minute lessons, roughly, and you've got 10 lessons you've missed, so not far off 2 weeks worth of learning that could be lost if we don't make every second count within a lesson. Another thing we'll be kind of applying as we go along is Solow's taxonomy to the learning cycle. If you want, you could pause the video now, do a bit of research, or afterwards have a kind of a look at it as an alternative to Bloom's taxonomy. It's just looking at kind of higher order thinking skills, and part of the learning cycle is to kind of go from lower level to higher order thinking skills. Okay, the first stage of the learning cycle, connecting the learning. This is essentially a starter, so it could be one or both of reviewing and previewing the learning. How does this link back to what we've just done? How does this, what it is that you're going to learn in this lesson? It's the opportunity to look at the objectives for the lesson once you've done your starter. It's also an opportunity to hook the students in, to get them thinking about, getting them warmed up with what you're about to deliver to them. So what's interesting about this subject? What's the reason we want to know this? It's an opportunity to activate their prior learning, their schema. They're going to build their knowledge, or they're going to build their understanding on top of previous learning, so to kind of get that activated for them, or give them an opportunity to personalize something. Every second counts. So one really effective way of doing this is to verbally question them the second they come in the door, welcome them, but also pose some questions, getting them thinking, engaged from the very start of the lesson. And as a challenge, you could also think about kind of pre-lesson starters. Is there something that could be on the door of the lesson to get them stimulated? Is there something that you could give them to kind of question outside while they're waiting? And just to make sure you maximize that time that you have with the students. I'm going to ask you just to pause this video now for about 10 to 15 seconds, just to have a think about what types of starters that you could use to connect the learning and to get the students ready to learn. So a few examples of things that we've seen that were effective last year. Some people started with their previous plenary and they used their own assessment of that previous plenary to see if the students had made some progress with relearning stuff in their own time. A little activity called Consider All Possibilities. So a situation was given to students and the question was, what are all the possible reasons why the situations came about? And some students were using subject knowledge, some students were just being creative, but it was getting them interested in the topic. A quick Venn diagram of things that are similar between topics and things that might be different. So it could be in one part of the Venn the previous topic, and one part of the Venn the current topic, and students are trying to predict or guess what those links might be. Random object. So students were given a random object and they had to come up with words that they would associate with that object, and this linked into the plenary at the end of the lesson because they had to link the learning in that lesson to these random words, and there was a bit of a challenge around that. Talk about was start out where students were given the last lesson's topic and they're asked to just come up with as many words if you were talking about that topic in a minute that you would mention. So a bit like a game of Taboo, the words that you would kind of be most likely to say or to talk about when you were talking about that topic. And Comparison Alley was similar to the Venn diagram. It just had the last lesson's topic on one side and the other lesson's topic on the other, and what they had in common between the two. Just a quick word on the differentiation key at the moment. One of the things you'll be using to plan is the differentiation key, and just thinking about differentiation in terms of this matrix before. You may have seen it, it's just a high-low matrix with support on one side, the support we give students to help them to engage with a topic or a subject, and the level of challenge and expectations we have, with kind of a low level of support and a lower level of challenge create apathy in students, a high level of support but no challenge, getting the students into a comfort zone where they're not really doing much, a high level of challenge but with no support, creating stress and anxiety for them because they don't know how they can do it. But the high level of support and a high level of challenge allows students to perform highly. So kind of, but this will be individual to the individual students. So part of planning a differentiation is knowing the class, knowing the students, to make sure that each student is challenged and supported in the right way. So on that, we just have a quick overview of the methods of differentiation. Again, you can pause if you want to have a look through them, but the key is just down the left hand side, and on the right hand side there you have what the key stands for. So differentiation by outcome, or differentiation by extension. One of the most effective ways of differentiation is differentiation through support. Students supporting each other one-to-one or within small groups, which kind of gets around some of the issues we have with students finishing activities before their students. So faster readers, faster processors can support other students, and done in the right way, it's one of the most effective ways to differentiate. The second stage of the learning cycle is trying to make sure that all students are engaging in the new information that they are receiving in this session. So it's making sure that they get an accurate understanding of the topics, the concepts, the terms, the skills from the experts, you being the experts. As teaching staff, you're the subject specialists, you know what the accurate version is of what they need to know. There may be opportunities within this section for assessment for learning, depending on how you structure your activity. But the next step, which is the main activity, will tend to be the step where a significant amount of assessment for learning takes place. So once the students have the concept, have the skill, have the key term, this is the opportunity for them to redo it, to remodel it. This is about kind of practice in a controlled way. It's about the students playing with the information to consolidate this, linking it to their schema, linking it to their previous learning. And it's about how do you know that they know what you've just taught them. So kind of a key little mantra here is that they do it again, they do it better, and they do it perfectly. They can make links between this and the previous topics that they maybe haven't made, or check the links that they predicted in the starter, but it's reusing the information in a similar but slightly different way as well. It's the control, or there's more control than in the next stage, but a little bit less control than in the first stage. So there's a bit more freedom for the students. But again, there's an opportunity to kind of test the students to find out whether or not they are understanding this learning that is taking place. So this is about really getting it into short-term memory. This could be done through your peer or group questions or activities, some kind of timed writing activity if calculations are appropriate to your subject. It might be the students re-demonstrating a skill that you've just shown them how to do it. It will be effective if there's some kind of pre or post success criteria when they look at this part of the learning cycle, especially if you're incorporating some kind of assessment for learning. A little kind of note on assessment for learning here. Most of you would have probably seen this at some point if you've been here a year or two. If you're new, it's just a way of thinking about progress as being about feedback and practice. So the second stage of the learning cycle gives a little opportunity, but this third stage around the activity gives the students an opportunity for some feedback and some practice to try and make some progress in this session. So this can be a key part of the session where you see some progress from the students. In terms of the key for assessment for learning, there's just three really key ones here. Opportunities for peer feedback, so one person within a pair or a group has the accurate answer, the success criteria, and they are given feedback to the rest of the group. It might be teacher feedback, either as a class or again going around from pairs and groups to give feedback on the activity. You being the subject specialist and knowing the accuracy of the answers that you'd want to see, but it can also be an activity where the students are given some kind of success criteria or mark schemes and they are doing their own feedback. The first and the last are effective if the students take some kind of record of what it is that they need to improve away from that, so that they take some feed forward from that. For you as a teacher, you can provide the feedback and the feed forward within the session, or kind of use it to help to plan things going forwards. The fourth step in the learning cycle is to demonstrate. There are similarities between this and activity, with some subtle differences. Even though there are kind of links being made here, you could think about this as being letting the students play about with it a bit more freedom to try and construct some new meaning. So light bulb moments where they see a link between something that you hadn't expected before, opportunities to try and individualize this really down to their understanding, being creative with the topic in hand, looking for solutions to problems, looking for creativity. The opportunity to take a risk, to have a go at something and failing can be really powerful at this point, because real deep learning can come from that. And this is about kind of taking it into longer term memory, or allowing the students to activate that longer term memory as well. It's kind of linked to wider context thinking as well. So can the students see how this may link into other subjects or other areas of their learning? And it can be really kind of those higher level or higher order thinking skills, kind of justifying their opinions, having discussions, arguing against their peers and so on. The last step in the learning cycle that we're looking at is the plenary. And again, it's about giving the opportunity to check short-term memory. So from what you've done in that session, can the students still activate their short-term memory and see that it's in there? It's about quality and quantity. Obviously quality would be the most important, but sometimes it's just a number of things you want the students to be able to take away. It's the opportunity to look back at your objectives and see to what extent have they been met. It's also an opportunity to give some individual feedback and potentially some feed forwards, and again to review the lesson that's just gone and maybe to preview the next lesson. And coming back to that kind of every second counts theme. Once we've done our plenary, for example, using mini whiteboards, we could then again be questioning the students as they leave the room. So as we've checked that learning, just some verbal questions as they're leaving to make sure that right up until the last second they are thinking about the topic, the lesson, what's just gone on. Again, just an opportunity here to pause this little video and just to think about what types of plenary would be appropriate in your lessons and the lessons that you're thinking about in the first few weeks that would allow you to test and assess how successfully that lesson has met the objectives that you had for it. So just a few examples of plenaries that we saw last year that were effective. Really simple mini whiteboards, just using some well-crafted lesson objectives which were written as questions with command terms in there, and just the students assessing those and the teacher going around checking everyone's answer and giving feedback as to the accuracy. Just going back to the starter that was mentioned before, the kind of the random object and the words associated with that. So then at the end of the lesson, students were asked to kind of make links back to those words. How did what they learned in the lesson, could it be linked to those words, and some creative links made with those. Intra and intra-subject links. So how can we link what's been learned in this lesson with previous topics that have been learned, or how can you link this to topics and themes that you're learning in your other studies. The individual reader was a really effective one, where within the lesson where there was teacher or peer or self-feedback, the students had recorded those and they knew the parts of the lesson that they hadn't quite understood first time round. So for every individual student, it was redoing that part of the lesson and making sure that that was more accurate than it was the first time. And another one that was really effective, and it's a really good example of differentiation by support, was hand up, stand up, pair up. And within that, so there's whatever the task was, whether it was on mini whiteboards, whether it was any of the tasks above, as soon as the first student was finished, they put their hand up, and the teacher checked that student. Then that student was now going to go around and check the other student's work. So as soon as anyone was finished at that point, they would put their hands up. So once it's been checked by someone else, then you stand up and then you pair up and check that other person's work. And no one can leave until everyone's been paired up and had their work checked. And it's a really effective way of feedback happening more quickly and less reliance on the teacher to check every answer. Slight weakness in that you haven't checked every answer, but you've sped things up and you've got through more of the lesson and a quicker plenary from that. Just two quick examples taken from people's planners last year. So as you can see down the left hand side, there is the stages of the learning cycle mentioned, then just some quick notes as to what those stages would look like, just to keep the member of staff on track. Then a couple of key mentions of the differentiation that's planned, and then lastly just where the feedback and assessment for learning would take place. So really straightforward, very quick to do. Two examples of expectations in terms of lesson planning within the teacher planners. As I mentioned before, the presentation is going to be saved next to this on Moodle, so you can pause this or you can save it, print it out if you want. Just some things to think about when planning, just some questions to kind of help to direct how you would apply each step of the learning cycle, and also some kind of key ways in which when planning differentiation or planning feedback, how do we know it's going to be successful. And a little bit of a challenge at the bottom there, which is kind of within sessions, is the ways to plan for feed forwards, and then potentially opportunities for students to act on that. feedback and feed forwards being one of the most effective ways of students to make progress when we get it right. And lastly, just coming back to it, there's the overview of the expectations of the lozenge in the teacher planner. So again, you can pause this or have a look at it, or keep a copy somewhere, and hopefully that's been a refresher and also useful in terms of what the expectations are. There is a quick quiz just to check your understanding of this little activity. So once you've done that, the teacher planner is all yours.